Welcome to the It Depends podcast. I am your host, Kevin Goldsmith, and I am delighted every episode to bring you a chapter from my book, It Depends, Writing on Technology Leadership 2012 to 2022. If this is your first time hearing the podcast, I also mention that there is a newsletter that serializes the text of the book that appears on the weeks that the podcast doesn't appear, and there's links to that in the show notes. For those of you who haven't done the survey yet, I'll also remind you that's going on and would appreciate your feedback. If you've been a listener for a while, we are approaching the end of the book, and I'm trying to decide what to do and how to approach it after we complete all the chapters. There's some plans for some episodes after, but long term, I want to see what I want to do. What I've heard thus far is everybody would like me to continue to do this, which I appreciate very much. And so how that works and what the shape of that is, I'm still working through and would appreciate your input. We are 1 year past the release of the book. The book is on sale this month. If you go to itdependsbook.net and you scroll down to the bottom of the page, you'll see a link to Ingram Spark, which is one of the folks who pressed the book. And you'll see a discount link there, and that is at cost. So that's the cheapest it's ever going to be. That sale goes through the end of the month. So if you haven't had a chance to buy the book yet, a copy of the paperback book, now is your opportunity to go and do that and to do it at a pretty good discount. The best discount you'll get for the paper copy of the book. It's, I believe, now cheaper than the Kindle book. So please go do that. I want to give a big thanks to the engineering leadership community and to Airbnb for hosting me this week to give a talk. And it was great to see the Airbnb Seattle offices. I've been to other Airbnb offices over the years, but it's cool. It was also in the building that Avo is in. So it's been a while since I've been in that building. That was cool. But it was great to meet a bunch of you. Some of you listened to this. Thank you. To meet a bunch of you and just talk to some folks and just catch up with some Seattle engineering leaders. So I had a great time. I want to thank everybody who came out, and I want to thank the hosts, DELC and Airbnb. I'm going to get right to it because this is going to be a pretty long episode. This is one of the longest chapters in the book. This is chapter 33, which is called Spotify Technology Career Steps. So this is the actual text that was distributed to the company by the group that I talked about in the last episode. The last episode, if you missed it, was about the process of creating this document. The next episode, the one after this, is about lessons learned from the entire process and talking about also how we went from the document to the rollout, the things that worked, and honestly, there was some stuff that didn't. So I'm not going to get into that in this podcast because I'll get into the next episode. I think one of the things that struck me listening to this, because obviously before I record the podcast, I go and listen to the chapter to page all that back into my short-term memory. And it's been a while, frankly, since I recorded the audiobook that I've actually listened to it or read it. And so it reminded me of a bunch of things. I was able to approach it with a little bit of distance. And there was a few things that struck me, especially in the context of where I am in my career journey and also having written multiple other or been responsible for creating multiple other career pathing frameworks since I created this one. Some things struck me as I was listening to it. And I want you to pay attention to this before you hear it. In the last podcast, I talked about how your career path framework should be reinforcing the elements of your culture that you want to reinforce, because your career pathing framework is how you reward people, right? Promotion is a reward, not only because generally it comes with an increase in salary, but if you're using your career framework correctly, you're using it not only for promotion, you're using it for performance management. You're using that as the rubric that you compare performance against. And that is how if you remember the whole chapter on promotions and those kinds of things, the centrality of the career framework, that is like the spine for your engineering organization culture. And it should be reinforcing the things you're trying to support in your culture and minimizing the things you're trying to diminish. So it becomes the framework by which you measure, obviously, promotion, but also performance generally. That's the standard you're supposed to be comparing people to instead of comparing them against each other. It's also what should be the creation of whatever rubric you use for hiring. So you should be using that career pathing framework as the basis for hiring. So if you're hiring only on skill, is this person a good developer or a good tester or whatever, and you're not using those aspects of your career framework, not just to like find the appropriate level, but also to make sure like this person is exemplifying the things we're trying to support in our career framework. If you're not measuring against that, you're going to hire that person on skill alone. They're going to come in and they're not going to be successful because they're now being compared to a completely different framework than just the skill. So that's one of the reasons why this is, in many ways, probably the most important document a leader, an engineering leader, can have for their organization. So I wrote it at Spotify just to share because I'd learned from, as I mentioned in the last chapter, I learned from a lot of other companies and I thought it was really useful. I also thought, honestly, as I spoke about in the last episode, it's also a really great recruiting tool. Be very clear, be very open. We've all learned from Netflix, right? So there's multiple reasons why I made it public, but also I cannot tell you, because I lost count, the number of organizations where I am either in my consultancy being asked to come in and help engineering leader or a CEO, and the company is struggling with their engineering team. And I look at their career pathing framework and it's just something they copied and pasted from somebody else, sometimes even from Spotify, which would be a big mistake if you're not Spotify. Or I've heard engineering leaders just delegate that to HR and just don't even care. I literally have had people tell me about that they've done that at their company. And then they wonder why the engineering team's so out of kilter. And it's because there's no framework that they're using to build the team that they want. I also wanted to put out into the world, and that's also why I included in the book, that, hey, you know what? This stuff's really important and you really need to focus on it and you really need to put energy into it and you really need to care about it. There's lots of documents that we produce as engineering leaders. There's lots of processes we create. There's the software development lifecycle stuff and all that kind of thing. And all of that's important. But if you're trying to figure out how to make your engineering team more effective, if you're trying to figure out how to make your engineering team work better, this is the central document. This is the most important document. If you take nothing else from these chapters, to understand that and understand why it's important, and then how you go about it, take the lessons from these chapters. Don't take the specific framework. Don't use this framework. Make your own. So when you listen to it, and with that in mind, we are thinking about, in this group I talked about that we created to create this document, what I hear, specific things that we were worried about emerging in the organization that you can hear us talking about indirectly because it's not obvious. It's obvious to me because I was there, but I'll point it out to you now. So there's things that we were worried about or things we wanted to really reinforce. You hear things like this notion of team over individual. And I've talked about this in the context of Spotify multiple times because it really was across the company a very team-oriented culture. I think that's one of the reasons why Spotify was so successful around that time. But that wasn't evenly distributed, that culture. That was a much more Swedish culture than American culture, and the American team was growing in size. And I think some folks got it, and certainly we promoted that and we talked about it, but that is not American culture. American culture is army of one, very individualistic. Swedish culture, very team-oriented. And so there was some cultural tension between the growing American engineering team and the European team. I think also at this time, obviously Spotify was one of the marquee technology employers in Sweden. The Swedish market for engineering talent is only so big. So also we had lots of people coming from other European countries. And not all those countries had the same kind of team culture. So the reason why team over individual was a pillar of this was a reinforcement that we are a team culture, not an individual culture. And that was also because Spotify is famous for its team autonomy culture. But over the years, and certainly during the time I was there, even folks in Sweden started to misunderstand it. Another engineering leader at Spotify once said to me, I think in the early stages of this document, we're doing autonomy wrong. And he was right, because what was starting to happen was employees in the technology organization were thinking about individual autonomy and not team autonomy, and believing that they had the ability to do whatever they wanted, which was not the case. So there's a lot of reinforcement of team, and that comes from these concerns that the group had. And again, if you remember from the last episode, this group consisted of people from different countries. So it was really meant to be a fairly diverse group to represent all the different opinions. So this is all of us, different levels within the organization, all of us coming together around these. Obviously, while I did, specifically in the creation of this group, I did look for what I would call champion skeptics. If you're familiar with the Change Patterns books, that's like a role I had already read, Managing Change. So I knew about the role of the champion skeptic. So I went out and got some of the champion skeptics, brought them into the group. So there were people actively challenging different ideas. So it wasn't monoculture. There was debate. There was vigorous debate, and which was important. So anything that's coming out of that group is a broad consensus across a wide variety of opinion. And to the point, when you listen to it, I do hear us being somewhat conservative. That's another thing I wanted to point out. We're a little bit conservative. We created 4 levels. You hear in the document, we could have created more. We decided to create less. And then if we needed to add more, we would. In the next episode, you'll hear that almost happened almost immediately. 4 was too few, but again, is easier to add than to take away. You also hear that we didn't make your step public. And there's a brief explanation of why, but that is also us being conservative. We're very conscious of the fact that nothing existed before this, and now something was going to exist. People who might have thought that they were very senior in the organization were possibly about to find out that they weren't, not as senior as they thought they were. And the last thing we wanted to do was to embarrass those people publicly, have them actively fight the system because they believed that it was incorrect and it was a public embarrassment. So that's one of the reasons why we didn't set titles with it. Of course, people being people quickly just started to adopt their title anyway, because we left it open to them. So a lot of people immediately started talking about what their step was and making it all public. And that was fine. We gave them titles, but in the internal documents before we gave titles, we gave numbers, and then people just kept using those numbers. We even briefly talked about using colors or animals to really break the association between step and a ladder, because you'll hear in this document how hard we worked to not make it like a one unidirectional kind of up or out kind of thing. You hear that very clearly in the document. We were really trying hard to not enforce a really rigid thing. We wanted to give a lot of flexibility into people's choices. That is where autonomy was, is what is my career going to look like? We want to give people a lot of choices. We wanted to give people the ability to stay at a level if that's what they wanted, or if people were more interested in moving through this, we want to give them that choice too. If you haven't seen the text of the book, and if you want the text of this, it has already come out in the newsletter, so you can go back through the archive on Substack. So it's kevingoldsmith.substack.com. You can go find the chapter if you want to actually read the text. To be honest, it was really hard to do this in the audiobook, but I did my best. But that might be helpful, or even to look at that while you listen, because there's things like diagrams that I describe, as opposed to being able to just look at it. But one of the things that I talk about in the introduction, this idea of the level is a floor. It's behaviors. It's not achievements. It's a list of behaviors we expect to see, and we expect to see them consistently. And you're supposed to have all of them, not some of them, not most of them, but all of them. That was controversial. It was controversial within the group. It was controversial within the company. It was something I felt very strongly about. Also, this idea about behaviors versus achievement. I'll explain why. Some companies do achievements. You do this thing, 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 you get promoted. Boom, 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 checklist. I've worked in those kind of companies. Microsoft, when I worked at Microsoft, was that kind of company. But Microsoft also would limit the number of promotions per year. And so what would happen is, and this happened to me, which is why I feel so strongly about it, I was waiting on promotions for a long time where I had achieved, I'd gone through the checklist. I was a very ambitious developer. I wanted to move up. I did everything on the checklist. And then my manager would have to tell me, they would never tell you the truth. I learned that when I became a manager. But what they do is then make excuses why, even though I'd done everything I was supposed to do and it was a checklist, I hadn't quite made it. They couldn't promote me yet. They needed me to do a little bit more, which rang very hollow and which I later understood was BS. When I became a manager at Microsoft and I got to see behind the curtain a little bit, and then later, I think I had a director who was just really honest about it. I left Microsoft, went to do some startups, came back to Microsoft after the dot-com explosion, and came in at a level lower than I thought I should have. And I was promised, oh, that's fine. Like, you just show that we've misleveled you and we'll promote you. And then I said, okay, I didn't have a lot of choice. If you were working back then, it was nice to have a job. I spent a year working my butt off. My director came to me at the end of that year, said, wow, you've done amazing. We've clearly misleveled you. So yeah, you were absolutely right. You should have been at a higher level. Unfortunately, I've got a long list of people waiting for promotion. I've got you on the list, but it's probably going to be a while. And in Microsoft parlance, that was probably years before I'd get to the level I was supposed to be at when I joined the company. So needless to say, I had personal experience here and did not want to reiterate that mistake. It was really about the objectivity of, I've checked all the boxes, now you must promote me. Oh, we can't promote you for one reason or another. And sometimes, honestly, sometimes it is like somebody's checked all the boxes, but they've done it if a box is like, oh, release a feature. You hear about this at Amazon. I don't know if this is still the case, but you've heard like, why does AWS have so many new services and why are some of them redundant or almost the same as others? And it's because releasing a new service on AWS is like a critical piece of getting promoted to a certain level. So you have a lot of ambitious developers just inventing a new service, getting it pushed out into AWS so that they can get promoted. Somebody from Amazon, please, if that's no longer the case, please tell me. But I've had multiple people at Amazon tell me exactly that this is why it happens. So I know this does happen. Hopefully it doesn't happen anymore, because as a customer of AWS, it's crazy making. Anyway, so I was taking some of the lessons that I'd learned, this notion of behavior versus achievement. Sometimes people would do I've made a service for AWS. That's a checkbox. I've done it. It's been released. You should now promote me. And then nobody says, yes, but you just did a service we already have. This isn't really valuable to the company. So this is not a good reason to promote. But to that person, they're like, no, I did what you told me I needed to do, so now you must promote me. And so I wanted to get rid of that. I wanted to focus on behaviors, also because behaviors aren't transactional. Behaviors are demonstrating professional maturity. That's what I believe a career pathing framework should be reinforcing. Isn't I've done these things, so I'm now at this level, but is I've reached this level of professional maturity, and therefore I am now have this designation that says I operate at this level of impact. Another thing that you hear in this framework, and I do talk about it a little bit more, each step represents a sphere of impact. And I learned that from my time at Adobe. A implied aspect of that Adobe career pathing framework was that as you move up to certainly more senior IC levels that you were going to have an impact way beyond your team, to the point where once you became a fellow at Adobe, you were now in a rarefied air. You had an equivalency with, I believe, like a VP level engineering leader. You went to the same kind of things. You were expected to have the same kind of impact. So that I really appreciated because it made a lot of sense to me. So that's very clear in the Spotify career pathing framework as well. As you demonstrate more professional maturity, you have a broader impact within the company. The last thing I want to point out is that impact within the company. What is the company impact? Career pathing frameworks, if there was only one way to do it, we'd all have the same one. It is unique to each company, not only because of the engineering culture, but because each company is different. Each company has different goals. So what you also hear in this career pathing framework is, hey, the things that you do to contribute are there to contribute to the company's success, not to your success. So it's the team over person, but it's also you get reinforcement. And if you listen, now that I've told you about it, you'll hear it. There's reinforcement in there that it's not about you doing things that make you successful. It's about making your team successful, but also making the company successful. So going back to that example I had around AWS, creating a new AWS service, sure, whatever, great, possible revenue source. But creating a successful, useful to the company, that's really much better because that also demonstrates an understanding of the business and not just an understanding of how to code. That is reinforced in the Spotify career pathing, understanding the business, especially as you move into more and more senior levels. So as you listen to the chapter, listen for those things, the things I've already mentioned, see if you can hear them in the text of the document, but also listen for other things that I maybe neglected to mention or didn't even strike me, but that might strike you, and think about within your own company, if you were writing a new career pathing document today, what are the pieces that you would want to subtly reinforce? I think if I hadn't pointed out some of these things to you, you probably wouldn't have noticed them. It's me hearing them again and remembering that process and remembering the conversations and arguments we had about how much do we push on company understanding and business understanding, things like that. If I showed you the AVO career framework, if I showed you the Anaconda career framework, if I show you the DistroKid career frameworks, all frameworks that were created with me as the leader of the organization, you'll see a lot of these ideas show up in these documents as well. You'll see some of these same ideas appear in very different ways because they're different companies with different engineering cultures, but you'll see them there as well. So I present to you now Chapter 33 of It Depends, Spotify Technology Career Steps. Spotify Technology Career Steps, originally published on February 15th, 2016. This chapter contains the actual first version of the technical career steps as published within Spotify. Motivation behind the steps framework. As technology within Spotify has grown over the years, we have learned that people striving to increase their impact often wanted to become a chapter lead or product owner, even if they might have preferred the role of an individual contributor engineer. Everyone in Spotify Tech should have a way to grow their careers and expand the impact of their work, no matter what role they play. A shift into chapter lead or PO position is not necessary. The STEPS framework provides a way to do this. The STEPS framework. As your career evolves within Spotify, you will likely take on a variety of roles in a variety of contexts. You will work with multiple teams on multiple projects, perhaps in very different domains or perhaps in a smaller area of specialty. You will build capabilities and mastery. Your impact on Spotify will grow, and so likely will your sphere of influence. Your career development within technology will therefore be a journey, sometimes sideways, sometimes forwards, and always flexible. There are some common patterns in the series of roles people decide to take on, and in which disciplines and expertise areas they focus, but this is not rigidly defined. It is up to you, with the help of your manager, to choose a path that aligns your interests and the company's, and that helps you develop, grow, and to meet your own unique personal goals. Throughout this journey, as you gain expertise and develop your skills, you will have greater and greater impact. In other words, the degree to which you contribute to the success of Spotify, its team, and its mission will grow over time. The STEPS framework is designed to provide you with the opportunity to explore new roles, skills, contexts, and disciplines over time, avoiding a specific, rigidly defined track. A way to understand your progression towards greater and greater impact, independent of specific role or discipline, and a set of well-defined expectations corresponding to defined points in this progression. In practice, disciplines, roles, and steps. In practical terms, supporting this development journey requires a more complex framework than a typical vertically oriented hierarchy or career ladder. There are 3 key elements in the STEPS framework. A discipline is a domain of expertise and impact. Examples include coaching, software development, testing, and project management. A role is a way in which you engage with the team, project, or discipline. They are not formally defined, but there are some common ones. Examples include software engineer, tester, road manager, technical product owner, chapter lead, or agile coach. A step is the combination of a well-defined set of expectations and behaviors associated with a particular degree of impact on Spotify. As you take steps on your career path, your impact grows. In the end, your path will involve taking steps forward, growing your impact, and broadening your influence while you evolve through specific roles in various disciplines. Your compensation is influenced by your step, aligning your performance to the positive impact you are able to have on your team, your product, and Spotify as a whole. Moving to a new step in a given domain represents both an acknowledgement of what you have done and a commitment from your manager that you will get bigger challenges in the future. Your step is a measure of your personal growth and is intended for use in discussions about career development between you and your manager. Your step is private. Only you and your manager can see your step. But we believe in transparency, and so we will reevaluate whether everyone's step should be public in some form after we have lived with the framework for a while. It is much easier to share this information later than to unshare it if it becomes problematic. Behaviors and our expectations at different steps. We have identified 5 sets of behaviors that provide a framework for understanding and talking about the expectations on all of us at different levels of impact. They are: values team success over individual success, continually improves themselves and team, holds themselves and others accountable, thinks about the business impact of their work, and demonstrates mastery of their discipline. The greater the impact, the more we expect in each of these areas. A senior technologist who's helping to set company-wide strategy will need to make these values manifest in different and more sophisticated ways than a fresh-out-of-school member of a squad. The path. There is no one path through this framework. It is up to you and your manager to navigate the set of roles and the context in which those roles can be played, finding good ways to align your interests and your organization's needs. Through this process, you will always learn and grow, increasing your impact on the company, and thus moving to different steps. There is no expected amount of time that you will spend on each step. Some people will move through them faster and some will go slower. Some will reach a step and choose not to push towards the next step, instead growing in other ways. The steps themselves are a measure of professional maturity and are therefore cumulative. A tribe guild step contributor shows all the behaviors of the individual, squad, chapter, and tribe guild steps. Career steps for tech employees. There are 5 characteristics that every individual in tech should develop as part of their professional growth at Spotify. Values team success over individual success. We are a team and not a collection of unaffiliated individuals. You may be a part of several teams: your squad, your chapter, your guilds, your tribe. Contributing to the success of each of these groups is more beneficial to the company, the product, and our customers than chasing our own success at the cost of your teams. Continually improves self and team. Spotify believes in never settling for the status quo. We are always focused on learning and growing. Holds themselves and others accountable. As a company, we value transparency and autonomy. These values must be coupled with accountability if we are to succeed. Taking responsibility for your own actions and the actions of the team and holding others to this standard is critical for us to be able to trust and work with each other. Thinks about business impact. Spotify is a business. If we wish to keep working within the culture that we've built, we need to make sure that we are aligned with that business. Understanding how the choices you make affect the company is important for your growth as a professional. Mastery. While the other characteristics talk about expectations and behaviors that are independent of your domain or role, mastery is specifically about becoming a better software engineer, agile coach, technical product owner, QE, QA, or TA. There are items marked for each of these disciplines. Anything that isn't marked is expected of all roles. We have also identified 4 steps in your career path at Spotify. Each step is marked not only by increased responsibility, but also by your increased impact within tech. Individual step. At this step, you are focused primarily on being a useful contributor, gaining experience and learning how to be effective on the team. It is not expected that a member of technology would remain at this step during their entire time at Spotify. At this step, your focus should be on growing so that you can support your team. This is the only step where there is an expectation that all members of technology should move toward the next step. Squad chapter step. At this step, you are a resource for your chapter or your squad, either as a domain specialist for your team or as a generalist problem solver for them. You should be able to lead smaller efforts coordinating with other members of your team and drive them to completion and/or dig into tough problems and solve them independently, taking in feedback from your peers and focusing on the outcome. Tribe Guild step. At this step, you have an impact across squads or chapters. You are a resource for a larger group as a domain expert or generalist. You will lead cross-team, squad, tribe, chapter efforts involving more people and drive them to completion and/or you will take on large challenges, working with diverse stakeholders in multiple teams to solve a problem that affects your larger organization. Technology company step. At this step, your focus is significantly on supporting tech-wide or company-wide initiatives. You will road manage projects that span tribes and be responsible for solving tech-wide problems, and/or you will also represent tech in company and/or industry forums. And/or you will be a go-to person across the company to solve very complex problems. On recognition and promotions. When you are consistently demonstrating the behaviors and sustained impact of someone at a wider step, your manager should recommend you for an official promotion, as long as you are willing to accept the increased expectations going forward. The process for promotion depends on the step involved. A chapter lead can promote one of their individual step employees to a squad chapter step without outside approval, though the chapter lead will make this decision in part based on feedback from that employee's peers in the squad and chapter. Promotions from squad chapter step to tribe guild step must be approved by the relevant tribe lead after consultation with the tribe level leadership. Promotions to technology company step must be approved by the CTO after consultation with technical leadership, including people currently at the technology company step. Since we place so much value at Spotify on being an effective member of a team, promotion to the next step at all levels should involve consultation with a varied group of the person's peers. This can be done using the Loops performance review tool in addition to direct conversation, for example. Formal promotion to a new step will normally come with an immediate compensation increase, as well as an immediately increased scope of responsibilities. The promotion represents a commitment from both sides. You will keep executing at the more advanced level, and your manager will continue to provide opportunities to have broader impact. Examples of broader responsibilities as part of being at a more senior step for a developer could include things like driving the technical implementation of a new feature for a squad at the squad chapter step, figuring out how a tribe should adapt their systems for anonymization at the tribe guild step, leading the CDN technology strategy for content delivery, including technical feasibility, cost-benefit analysis, and vendor selection at the technology company step. Public recognition will frequently be decoupled from formal promotion. We believe it's more effective to recognize people for successful completion of important projects than for reaching a somewhat rare career milestone. So we expect to see more announcements like, "Please join me in congratulating Jane Jones, who drove this project to completion over the last few months," and fewer announcements like, "Please join me in congratulating Jane Jones, who has officially been promoted to the Tribe Guild step." On setting the step for a new employee. It can be hard to tell what step a new employee is on based solely on their interviews. To give the employee time to acclimate to Spotify and their role, their official step will not be determined until their 6-month review. During that review, the step is set through a discussion between the new employee and their manager. The new employee should do a self-evaluation with the framework to see how much they believe each behavior represents them. The manager should talk to the peers of the employee and use their own knowledge and experience from working with the employee to do an initial evaluation of how the different behaviors in the framework describe the employee. A discussion between the manager and the employee will show where they agree and where they differ and allow them to reach a decision on which behaviors describe the employee today. This also sets the context of areas to focus on in the near future for growth. On compensation. Your compensation as a Spotify employee within technology is influenced by the STEP framework. Having a bigger impact on the company should lead to a higher pay in a straightforward and transparent way. We want to make sure that Spotify salaries are following the market. Therefore, we get salary benchmarks from specialized suppliers and industry leaders in this area. Since the salary benchmarks are used as a recommendation and not as strict guidelines when setting salaries, we will not share them internally. We've always used market data to help guide our pay principles. Since H2 of 2015, we are matching them to work within our STEPS framework. The salary benefits for steps overlap each other. This means that a person at the individual step can earn as much as someone at the squad chapter step and vice versa. On titles. Steps do not map to titles. We approach titles differently depending on whether we're talking about internal or external use. Internally, scopes of impact have defined names, the individual step to technology company step. Roles have defined names, some more formally defined than others. Roles are typically more useful for internal communications than anything else. Externally, employees have a tremendous amount of flexibility regarding how they represent themselves externally. They can use their roles, they can use more standard titles that they feel are more communicatable. We may in the future provide examples of external titles that commonly map to our internal role names to facilitate this. We expect employees and their managers to work together to come up with appropriate external title usage. On requirements versus examples. A few questions are common around the examples provided in the framework. Are the behaviors in the bubble diagrams hard requirements? How many of the behaviors must someone be demonstrating, and how consistently and for how long must they be demonstrating them before they are considered to be at a particular step? The most important point is that managerial judgment is always required. This framework provides a structure for fostering conversation between managers and employees, but it cannot ever provide a detailed recipe for how to handle any particular situation. So the answers are intentionally not black and white. The intention of the STEPS framework is to describe what it looks like for an individual to have increasing levels of impact on the Spotify tech organization. But the truth is that there are lots of ways to have big impact, and we want to support all of them. Someone might be moving the whole company forward through their deep expertise in a particular technology and by putting on their headphones in a corner and single-handedly writing a huge and critical piece of infrastructure that accelerates the work of hundreds of other people. Someone else might move the whole company forward by spending lots of time in meetings, driving consensus, and resolving conflict as the company does something new. These and lots of variants in between are all valuable. So the answer is that the behaviors in the bubbles are mostly examples. Many of the bubbles describe a specific activity more than a general behavior. These activities are mostly meant as examples of step-appropriate behaviors. as opposed to specific activities required to demonstrate that behavior. In aggregate, they paint a picture of what we mean when we say tribe and guild impact, squad and chapter impact, etc. But they should be treated as triggers for discussion rather than a checklist. Are you doing this thing? Would your work have more impact if you did? In general, we think these are all valuable things that people in tech should do. But it is not about seeing a behavior once and checking it off, or seeing a behavior consistently and checking it off, or about checking off 80% of the bubbles at some level or 100% of the bubbles. It's about the impact that your work has over time, and these bubbles are a loose proxy. Frequently asked questions. What about my special situation? These guidelines should never trump common sense. People are complicated, and there may be some special cases that this framework does not address well. Managerial judgment will always be needed in all cases. I do not see myself as a developer, QA, TPO, or a coach. My discipline is not mentioned in the framework. What expectations are set on me? The framework provides examples for 4 of the most common disciplines within tech, but there are others. It would not be possible to find good examples for all possible disciplines or combinations of these. The existing examples should inspire and help you and your manager to set the expectations for you, even if the names of the disciplines are not a perfect match. If a tribe, after evaluating the framework later, comes to the conclusion that the present disciplines are not helpful enough and need arises to define new examples for other disciplines, they can introduce new ones. Is there a set of formally defined roles? No. As context and ways of working differ across technology, formal, predefined roles would not fit into a lot of squads. We do have disciplines, for example, coaching, software development, toolsmithing, quality assisting, to guide skill sets and expectations, but as an individual contributor in tech, we do not forcefully limit our work to one of these. What is the connection between roles and steps? Do I have to be at a specific step to take on certain roles? Not for most roles, but some examples. You won't be a good chapter lead if your sphere of influence is individual. Hence, being squad, chapter step, or above is needed. To be a chief architect, your sphere of influence needs to be on a company level. Is this a reporting hierarchy? Reporting is based on your role and discipline and not your step. Based on their role, a software engineer of any step can still report to a chapter lead. Are steps like senior, etc. designations? Steps are a tool to facilitate career development and do not confer any title. Do I have to demonstrate the behaviors in all value areas to be considered for a wider step? As a rule, yes. Steps are intended to reflect growing spheres of influence and impact. We believe all the competencies listed are necessary for someone to really have the increased level of impact that a new step represents. However, people are complicated, and there may be cases where someone's strength in one area compensates for a weakness in another. Do I need to continuously move through steps during my career at Spotify? This is something to discuss with your manager. While we expect engineers to continuously improve their skills, there is no rule that one must continuously increase their sphere of influence. Individual step is considered an introductory step for an inexperienced contributor. We do expect that employees will move from the individual step as they become contributing members of their squad. What happens if I want to move to a step with less impact? You may choose to embrace a new discipline where you have a significantly lower level of mastery. There may be other situations that lead you toward this choice. Again, people are complicated, and we neither can nor should try to anticipate every situation. If you decide that you want to make this kind of change, discuss it with your manager. Note that your compensation is tied with your step. How does this relate to loops? Loops, Spotify's performance review framework, is a tool focused on performance development that puts employees in the driving seat. It can be very useful for your career evolution. Promotions are a separate process from loops. How does this relate to priorities and achievements? Priorities and achievements are a way for you to make commitments to goals and measure your performance against them. This can help determine your salary adjustments within your range year to year, but it is not tied to your step, which will determine your salary range itself. As you increase your impact by moving to wider steps, your priorities and achievements should reflect that. When can I get promoted? When you and your manager agree that you are consistently operating at the next step. Specifically, promotions do not need to be tied to the annual salary review cycle. See on recognitions and promotions for the details on how the promotion process works. To what extent is this a tool, guidance, or a formal policy? This framework is intended to provide a concrete tool step for employees and their managers. It is the model all of technology is using. While deviations may make sense and be needed in some cases, that is the exception and is something that should be discussed at the tribe leadership level. How does my career step affect my salary? Your career step is used to determine a range of pay based on people at similar sphere of impact in similar disciplines. This pay range gives guidance to managers on competitive rates of pay in the industry. It does not set your salary from year to year. Your pay change set in your yearly salary review is based on your performance based on expectations during the previous year. Do I need to be promoted to increase my salary? No. You can stay at a step and continue to increase your salary year over year. The salary ranges from step to step overlap significantly, and they track the market, which is evaluated every year. Your salary increase is based on your performance, your behaviors, and the market. How do I, as an introvert, fulfill the expectations on communication and networking in this framework? It seems to be tailored for more extroverted people. The important thing is to make a positive impact. Given that, you have to find your own way, something that you feel comfortable with. Some people prefer the written language, others the vocal one. Some people share their ideas right away, others prefer to take their time to think and elaborate. You just need to make sure that you are communicating in an effective and constructive manner. I hope you got some value out of the chapter. It is a long chapter. It's a 20 plus minutes chapter. So it's easy to lose the path. Again, you can go to kevingoldsmith.substack.com and look back through the newsletter, and you'll find the text of this chapter with all the diagrams there. And you can leverage that. Of course, you can always buy the book. I'll remind you, the book is on sale this month. I hope you learned something from this chapter. I hope you got ideas from this chapter. If you are currently working on career pathing for your company, or at some point in the future have an opportunity to contribute to that, I'm hoping this gave you at least some ideas. That's the intent. If you're an employee in a company and you're looking at the company's career pathing framework, and maybe it gives you the opportunity to look and see how the culture is either reinforced or not based on the document from your company, very helpful. As you think about your own career progression and how you want to move up, either as an IC or as a manager, that is also something to think about. Next episode, we get into the lessons learned. The rollout of this framework was not smooth. Learned a lot of lessons along the way, lessons that still serve me today. This last episode, this episode, and this next episode are a trio, are the Spotify Career Pathing Trio. You definitely want to listen to all three if you're interested in this stuff. I'm going to remind you again to go take a look at the survey and please fill it out. It's linked from the show notes. It's linked from itdependsbook.net. Go buy the book at discount for the month of March. Please do. I would appreciate it, even though it's at cost. I don't gain money. I just like the idea that there are more of them out into the world. For those of you who already bought the book, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I will see you next week in the newsletter. I will see you in 2 weeks back here on the podcast. Have a great week. Thanks so much for listening. Please, again, subscribe, rate, share episodes of this podcast on your favorite podcast app. Thank you for Answers to April for the music used in this podcast. To hear more from Answers to April, visit answerstoapril.com. This podcast is a production of Unit Circle Media.